Hey, welcome back to Guardbeardia. I have for you chapter 11 today of the Veil Rider series. Additionally, I got some more fan art from the Discord channel. You can join the Discord down below in the information section, or whatever it's called, detail section, whatever. But here's the art. The art is from a user named Ariman, and he posted this in the Discord. And on the picture you can see that his name is Jacopo, Instagram y.ariman. So yeah, thanks for the art, bud. Looks really neat. I actually like how the camo armor looks. Not a bad idea, actually. But anywho, without more further ado, let's get into the chapter. Domino sniffed at Yule's neck, inhaling sharply and loudly. "You still smell like her, boss." "God damn it!" Yule roared, and swung around to try and land a slap on Domino. Domino danced away with a laugh and dived over one of the many tall bushes that rippled the forest floor, and escaped his judgment once again. Yule had been taking a lot of guff from his troopers for spending a night with Olivara, and they all seemed to revel in the fun that was to poke at him, or say that he was glowing. Cosmoline Company arrived in the thickly wooded area some days after leaving Norris, and made a small outpost in the deepest part of the woods. They were able to find a small clearing where they could get their vehicles in and out, and have a highly defensible position. The clearing was on top of a small hill, and gave them good eyes on every approach up to the spot. Hours were spent marking a driving route for the vehicles for going in and out, then finding two more of them in case of an emergency. But with a bit of digging and chopping, the deed was done. The majority of this hilltop outpost was earthworks, with the company digging into rock and earth to form their pillboxes or trenches, then stacking some of the felled lumber here and there for cover. Yethis commented that it looked like a giant beaver nest when she saw it finished, and the company was more surprised that they had beavers here more than anything else. Down below the hilltop and facing the direction of Norris, the dragoons constructed a rough wooden corral to hold their horses, and had rotations where they would shepherd the herd out into the grassy area so the horses could graze. The compliant nature of the breed made this an easier deal than it should have been, and the dragoons breathed out a sigh of relief that the valley elves had bred some intelligence into the steeds. Chickily was given the task of staking out in the treetops and looking out for anything that may be coming or going in the distance, and could usually be seen skipping along the treetops to and fro as he made his rounds. Eris stayed tight to Yule in case he had to send her off in a hurry to ask for help, while normal Pumperum runners brought letters and mail to Yule from the city. It took 4 more days until the brush feathered appeared, and they were not alone either, as they had brought some friends with them. Yule was using a woods exie, bought at the market before they left, to hew at a piece of half tree for a field table, when he saw Chickily running across the treetops and yelling Yule's name. Yule almost cricked his neck from how hard he spun it to the yelling, and hefted the exie in his right hand while running down the hill, drawing out his M9 with his left as his boots pounded the ground. Eris stepped after him along with 10 of his riders, and Chickily flapped down from the trees to land in the grass before them with a whoomp of weight and air pressure. He pointed both his wings into the forest, his face alight with excitement. "Chickily saw them. They finally returned, and there are other riders with them." Yule narrowed his eyes and looked off into the forest where Chickily was pointing. "Not riders, Chick. Not riders." Yule looked down to Eris and pointed the exie towards the hill fort, of which barrels of multiple weapons began to swivel in rough wooden pillboxes and turn towards the forest. "Go fetch Brita, please." Yule waited near the tree line with his other riders for the harpies to come out of the brush, and with the rustle of leaves they finally appeared. Yule took one look at them before turning on his heel and bellowing at the outpost. "Gruesome! Yethis!" Yule heard Gruesome before he saw him emerge from the fortifications, the ex-marine's boots thudding so hard on the ground that it was like the grass suddenly grew a heartbeat. Yethis sprang like a deer after him, but almost stumbled and tumbled down the hill, thankfully catching herself and rolling back into a run. The brush-feathered were covered in blood and gunshot wounds, many of which appeared to be shrapnel fragments or buckshot, and there were only 2 of them, not the 5 that had set out from Emil Norris. The only ones that stood before Yule now were the singular female and the smaller of the males, both of whom still wore the ghillie suits he had given the group. Behind them emerged a ragged platoon of soldiers, and they looked as rough as the brush-feathered did. It seemed as if the entire ragtag group had been peppered with munitions for miles, some of them still hefting their rucksacks while others just had their weapon and battle rigging. A lot of them wore the black, crimson, and gold of Germany, while others bore the Czech blue, red, and white, and a small sprinkle of them wore the white and red of Poland. Yule flattened his hat to his head to make sure the amulet made contact, and spoke aloud to the one in front, which wore a field cap and no helmet. "I'm glad you kept my harpies safe. I hope you come here as friends." The grizzled man in front of him was a German, having a strong, proud jaw, and a face that read that it had seen a thing or two, and done even more. "Your German is flawless for a redneck," he growled out, but it bore humor. "I wish I could take the credit," Yule replied, and smiled with his eyes but kept his mouth in a line. "Neither can we, for getting here. These brave little Vogelfolk won the day, and even then so little of us made it through." "So little of you?" Yule asked, and leaned to the right to peer over the man's shoulder. Editor's note, I'm really bad with German accents. I'm just going to go on from regular from here. "We set out with a full company. This is all that is left." The man motioned back towards the ragtag group of soldiers behind him. The Vogelfolk were able to get into the base and leave the leaflets from Breda. Apparently, they had been hiding all around us, and gathering information from what we can guess, as we don't speak their twittery language. However, they were there at the meeting point when the day came, and we brought all of our men with us. Things have been fishy ever since we arrived, and nothing has been as agreed to. Gruesome arrived and ripped open his medical bag. Inside were the usual Terran implements used for field operations, but also bags of what looked like greasy sludge, bottles of many-colored liquids, and a kind of bandage that looked like it was constantly wiggling. Gruesome pulled out his tweezers and began pulling shrapnel from the brush-feathered, his mouth set in a grim but professional frown. 40mm grenades, Gruesome murmured, and flicked a large shard of metal at Yule, which had come out of the female harpy's leg. Yule caught it, surprised Gruesome had spoken, and held it in his hand, rolling the bloody metal over in his digits as Yethis began to cut open her finger and speak the rituals of healing. As Gruesome was pulling metal out of the female brush-feathered, she began to tremble as the exhaustion began to set in. The more metal Gruesome pulled out of her, the more it became apparent these troopers were running for their lives the entire way here. Slugs from rifles, shrapnel from explosives, wood fragments from trees. It was like they had been hunted. "What the hell happened?" Yule asked, but heard a noise and turned his head. He looked over to see the female harpy was starting to choke and sob, her feathers almost rattling from how hard she shook. Tears streamed down her dirty face and left trails as it cleansed away the filth. Gruesome set down his tools as she began to cry while looking down at her bloodied feet, and he cleaned away the blood on his hands. Gruesome, the scarred veteran of many tours in the desert, the last person many of his brother Marines saw as they passed in the field, the man whose job it was to patch together the broken, knelt down and wrapped his huge arms around the shuddering harpy, and whispered to her in perfect Tunka, "It's okay. It's all right." I tried," she sobbed back in the language, her shoulders heaving as she hiccuped, and snot began to drip from her nose. I know. It's okay. You made it here." Gruesome pulled her in tight, then scooped up the other harpy and pulled him into the hug as well. The male just leaned against Gruesome. He didn't cry or weep, but just went limp against the huge marine, exhausted. Yule and the German looked down at the little scene with set jaws, while Yethis quickly shuffled over and added her own arms to the hug as well, while still healing the smaller male with her bloody finger. The German looked over to Yule, then held out his hand. Oberfeldwebel Piper. Yule clasped the hand in his own. Just call me Yule. Brita managed to make her way there and came to a halt in front of Piper, giving him a salute in which he returned. She then spoke out in German while reaching out to shake his hand as well. "Piper, you're alive!" Yule heard her say, and her eyes were filled with happiness. "Just barely. We all thought you were dead as well. Good to see that is not the case." "They did their best," Brita said with a grin, and then looked behind him. "This is all that's left?" Piper nodded and began their tale. Since arriving on the other side of the veil, their markers were taken. They were disarmed while inside the base, and plugged away into a corner of the footprint along with everyone else who was not part of this mysterious main clique that ran the base. I am used to elitism among the ranks, but this was odd, even for me, Piper said with a rueful glare, and watched Gruesome pick up both of the harpies and carry them over towards the outpost, while Yethis picked up his medical bag and carried it behind them. Piper went on to tell Yule how men and women of the company started going missing. Every dawn, Piper would hold a formation and do a count, and they were always down a trooper every morning without fail, at the usual rate of a soldier a day. When he would go to command and ask where his trooper was, he would then be told they were out on a special assignment, but the soldier would never return. Additionally, the southern elves were being quickly folded into the ranks of the main guard at the camp, until they were the majority in number, and still further the Terrans were pushed into the corner of the base. There were even times when Command and the Chosen Children would speak of the Terran soldiers with open disdain, and all requests for veil transfers were always denied. More and more he observed personnel coming through the veil, and they always wore the same face when they would look upon a Terran or Valley Elf. Open disgust. I knew things were beyond strange when I caught one of the upper command off guard when I burst into his quarters after news of the ambush had happened. For a split second, his eyes, they were all black. I had but a moment to see this when his eyes sprang back to their normal brown I had known them to be, and he started watching me closely every day since. Piper ran the pad of his index finger down the bridge of his nose as he took a moment to think. I don't know how they were doing it, as they never told any of us when we asked, but they are growing the size of the veil, expanding it and hewing out the rock. What was once a cave is now like a giant cavern, allowing them to bring in more things from the States. We were told that you folks slaughtered the entry team, and that you were terrorists trying to occupy the veil and ransom the world for your own gains. We were given the assignment to come in and eradicate you, but all we did was get shoved into the corner of the base, sent on suicide missions, or just disappear completely. When I finally caught them speaking Elvish in the open, right out of the veil, greeting each other, that's when I knew something was definitely not right. After a while, we found the letters and made our escape. They hounded us through the fields and grass, cutting us down when they could find us. The harpies hid us as best as they could, and we fought back when we were able. But they somehow had the ability to find out where we were without actually seeing us and rain down mortar fire. Or a Finnick would suddenly lurch out of the tree line and pin us down with his grenade launcher. Piper lit up a crumpled cigarette and gave a harsh inhale, before blowing the smoke out of his nose and rubbing the thumb of his smoking hand across his forehead. "Yule, we set out with a company of riflemen. This is all that's left. We were hunted down by our own countrymen. Why? What is going on?" Brita looked to Yule, and Yule stepped forward, motioning to the troopers who were waiting patiently in the background despite how tired they were. "Head on up to the outpost. We have food and water there. Brita, if you want, you can fill them in. You're not under my command." With that, he began his walk back towards the outpost. Brita began to fill in Piper on her and Gremlin's findings, and slowly the two pieced together all the things that seemed to be part of the same puzzle. Yule had already come to the same conclusion on his walk back to the outpost, but one fact still dug a deep burrow in his skull. They were making the Veil Gate bigger. To him, that meant they wanted to bring in the bigger weaponry. He knew what a Finnick was. It was around the same footprint as an M1117, but a bigger gate meant tanks, armored combat vehicles, and aerial vehicles. Yule mounted the top of a pillbox and thumped down the other end, landing solidly on the bottoms of his boots. He kinda regretted that, as now his heels were buzzing, but still he trudged on into the center of the outpost. In the middle of the outpost was the main command bunker, nestled deep down into the hill where they had hit rock, and they made it as strong as they could with timbers and felled trees in case they came under attack by range supporting ordnance. Inside this main bunker, Gruesome was cleaning off the harpies with a wet rag. Yethus was helping him, currently wiping away at the male brush-feathered's cheeks and cleaning away the grime and powder burns. "Chickalee?" Yule asked to the room, and Chickalee plodded over, looking worriedly at the other harpies. "Chickalee, hey, don't worry about them. They'll be fine. There were 5 brush-feathered when they left," Chickalee said softly, and he looked up at Yule, a worried expression painted across his face. Yule's eyes stared down at the harpy as his mouth formed an angry frown, and Chickalee could see the hard regret that began to rim Yule's eyes. "Yes, Chickalee, I know there was. Now there are 2. I know. Look, bud, I need you to run a message to Coco. Can you do that for me?" Chickalee puffed out his chest and said with a solid voice, "No fear in these feathers. Chickalee hears." Yule nodded and quickly scribbled out a long note, handing it to Chickalee. Chickalee went to grab it, but found Yule still holding on to the rolled-up note, and Chickalee paused. "Chickalee, if things get hairy, you punch out and come back. You hear?" "You hear," Chickalee asserted with a determined smile, and Yule released the scroll. Chickalee ran around, gathering up his equipment for the flight, while Eris stalked over and began to try and comfort the still-crying female harpy, who clung to Gruesome as he tried to clean all of the dried blood from her war-torn body. Piper and Brita were just mounting the edge of the outpost when Chickalee soared over the top of their heads, almost taking off Piper's field cap, and he flapped aggressively up to his cruising altitude. Piper chuckled once, then turned around to watch him fly off into the high sky. When Chickalee was but a smear on the big blue, Piper turned to see his troopers had already passed out asleep, scattered amongst the many bunkers and foxholes where Veil Riders stood over them, taking the guard as they slept. Brita had filled Piper in on what happened to the column, and he knew full well these men had ripped those vehicles apart themselves. But it was already past time to be caring about that. The enemy had been playing them all against each other, and last he checked it wasn't these Americans who had hunted them down. From now on, every Terran had to be on the same side if they ever wished to make it back home. Brita led Piper into the bunker, both of them arriving in time to see Yule addressing his NCOs. "And they're trying to make it bigger. I've sent word to Zerg Company that we have to start moving in on this thing. If they bring in even one Apache, we're all fucked, and they're going to hunt us down like they did the Europeans. Keep watch over them, make sure they are fed, and help them get back into fighting form. Dismissed. The NCOs of Cosbling Company turned and filed past Piper, many of them clapping the German NCO on the shoulder before exiting out the mouth of the bunker. Yule turned with the clink of 10 mugs and held 2 brimming cups of his precious retort coffee. He held one out to Piper, who took the cup in both hands, leaning in to savor the smell. Pretty fucked up, I know. Played us like a fiddle, Yule said chidingly, taking a sip of his own tin cup. They knew how we would react when we saw blue helmets pop out of the veil. Then they twisted the narrative all the way around its own head to their own needs. To think, all those tinfoil hats were speaking the truth. Except they were wrong, of course. Piper raised his eyebrows to Yule, taking off his cap and sipping heavily from the cup. They depended on lizards. If only they knew it was fairies the entire time. Piper gave a wet chuckle as he tried to swallow his coffee without choking on it, and they both shared a wry spout of laughter. Brita stood nearby, watching them both closely. Piper coughed once, then spoke up. After what Brita has told me, I think that maybe her convoy was sent as some kind of lure to try and draw you out. Give them ammunition to use in order to bring in heavier vehicles. Highly possible, Yule agreed. I would have done the same if I had come across the convoy. Germans already have once, after all, Piper said with a grin, and Yule laughed quietly, getting the reference of the ambushes the Germans had perfected in World War II. The 2 men looked over to Gruesome, who was now just holding the female brush-feathered as she choked out in sobs, and the 2 cleared their throats awkwardly. Perhaps this was not the time for gentle banter. Anyway, Oberfeldwebel, you are welcome among my men. I'm afraid that if we wish to continue killing each other, it will have to wait until we have dealt with the Veil. I'm sure we can set up a date later on for that if we wish, Piper added, and he heard Brita snort in the background. Old habits among soldiers die hard, it seems. There was no better time for humor than when in the company of the miserable. How many more regular Terran troopers are left at the base? Yule asked, putting a hand in his pocket as he supped. Not many. Maybe a few platoons. I don't even know if they are even human, after all. I know my lads are, at least. Yule mused, pulling over a crate or 2 for them to sit on. How many total combat elements? Quite a few, actually. The children of the Chosen, or whatever they are, have been getting drilled hard in the base and are more or less the bulk of the combat arms there. So, we have been played by elven fae, have we? Seems that way. Piper grunted and sat down heavily on one of the crates Yule had pulled over. What a bunch of bullshit. So their plan is to use our tech to invade this place, eh? Yule nodded, and Piper just guffawed. Gott in Himmel, that is playing the long game at its finest. Yule filled in Piper on the current strength, the resources they had, as well as what his co-commander Coco had been up to in the east. He also told the German of what the dwarves were cooking up in the north, and the support they had from some of the races. When Piper had all the holes filled in, Yule gave him his own personal bunk space to sleep, and headed out of the command bunker to get some fresh air. Fresh air, and to get away from the female brush-feathered, who had not stopped crying the entire time, and it was starting to weigh on Yule's conscience like stones would on a feather pillow. The European troopers were still sleeping, and the Veil Riders were slowly trading out the watch to keep guard over them, detaching off to go eat, sleep themselves, or take care of the horses down below in the corrals. Yule found a rough wooden seat and plunked himself down on it. After a moment of staring down into the dirt, he slowly brought his head down and rested it in his hands, running his fingers through his hair. His mind was on the dead brush-feathered, whose bodies were littering the path here with the rest of the slaughtered European troopers. It was a gamble to do what he did. He knew that much when he had sent them off. But the gamble ended up being a net loss, with more than 70 people dead and now rotting in the open without a proper burial. He felt something hush near him, and he looked up to see Eris looking down at him, her wings brought together in front of her. Yule breathed in deep and leaned back. "Yeah, kid, what's up?" Eris didn't speak for a few moments, but just leaned into Yule's shoulder and hugged him with both wings. She buried her face into his neck and let out a sigh. "It's okay, Yule." Yule sat still for some seconds after she had spoken, but leaned his head over slightly to nudge hers with his. "It's not, Eris, but I know what you mean." She sighed and just held Yule. Her eyes looked up and saw that Yule had flicked something from his face, and saw a bit of water sparkle in the sunlight near the edge of his eye. Inside the command bunker, Yetha stretched and cracked her back. She had given a lot of blood for the healing of the harpies alone, and thanked the heavens that the other humans were as easy to take care of. She looked down and smiled sadly at Gruesome, who was still holding the wounded harpy in his arms. She was finally asleep, clinging still to the grizzled marine, and Gruesome looked up at Yethus. "Can you grab me a blanket, please?" he whispered in Tunka, and Yethus bowed slightly before running off to fetch him a blanket and a pillow as well. Yethus then left out into the approaching dusk and began to heal the sleeping European troopers who lay scattered around the outpost. A splotch of healing here, a yank of metal there, until finally she herself was spent and needed to recoup with some rest of her own. Gruesome stayed with the harpy the entire night, guarding her as she slept. He knew the nightmares would come, and he would be there to ease their onslaught. And there we go. Chapter 11 all done. Wheezy nose, that was weird. So, just in case you guys are wondering, I'm at 130 pages it seems. Almost 50,000 words and 266,000 characters. Kind of fun, isn't it? Also, I want to address some things I'm getting in my emails. I'm getting a few emails from you guys saying how you love the story, but you can't give money. And hey, I want to point something out to you real quick. You don't have to give me money, alright? You don't have to go to my coffee and give me money. I know life is tough. I know you guys are doing your best every day, alright? You don't have to apologize to me because you don't have the money to give. I got you. I'm not upset. I'm not worried. What I want is for you guys to do the best you can every day and get yourselves where you want to be. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'm going to be here trying to do these stories for you all through the entire time I can. Don't worry about it. If you want to give when you can. Not give because you have to. Alright? Just don't worry about it. I know you're doing your best. I know all of you are. Don't worry about it. Hopefully next month the patch will be made and ready to buy so y'all can have your little patch you can wear in cosplay as a Veil Rider. Some of y'all were saying you want to do that. It's kind of cool. But yeah, I'll see you hopefully Friday with chapter 12. Yeah, until I see you next time on this side of the veil, this has been Guard Bro.